Thanks so much, team. So sorry online who couldn't hear until now. Start again from the intersectional lens of housing. When it comes to my physical health, my current housing provides me, sorry, I need to regulate. When it comes to physical health, my current housing provides me physical safety and shelter from the elements. It's also allowed me to build up better nutrition and cooking routines. However, my house is also the place that I previously experienced domestic violence, physical assault. So there is that lingering threat of the perpetrator coming back since they still know where I live, but I recognise that I am still a homeowner in this economy and I'm not homeless anymore. So overall, I think I'm fairly privileged and I put this dot fairly high up. By the way, I'm okay, I just the emotions came up quite a bit during the break. Housing, my experience is significantly worse. A lot of my homelessness was as a direct result of psychological abuse and mental health challenges, and even though I have a house now, when you've experienced homelessness once, let alone multiple times, that trauma can stay with you. Since my house was also the site of domestic violence, there are many triggers around this and my house, so overall I put this blue dot fairly low. The intersectional lens is immigration. I was born in Australia, and my mum is a refugee, my dad's a migrant. When it comes to physical health, I'm an Australian citizen by birth. I've really never had to worry about whether my citizenship will affect whether I can get a Medicare card or health insurance. Immigration is not something that I've really had to think about when it comes to physical health. And there's this saying that goes, if you don't have to think about it, then it's a privilege. So I'll put this red dot very high up on that line. When it comes to mental health, I've similarly... The doors are screaming, my goodness. When it comes to mental health, I've similarly never had to worry about whether my citizenship or my visa status will allow me to get a mental health care plan. However, I've had many family and friends that don't seek mental health due to a number of reasons to do with immigration. Often their immigration status results in higher fees or there's a risk of them being deported. And there's generally a lack of understanding of how migration really affects mental health. Whilst I personally haven't had this experience directly, I'm also a carer and it's affected many of the experiences that I care for, of the people that I care for. So I will put this blue dot fairly high up, but a little bit lower than the red dot. The second last intersectional lens is language. English is my native language, but it's my parents' second language. I will note that for this section, when I talk about language, I'll also include literacy as well. When it comes to physical health, my experiences have honestly been pretty fine, but I've often had to be a former translator for family members. There's been quite a few translation issues that have been less than ideal, but it's always been something that I could navigate because I had learned how to gain a fairly decent level of physical health literacy. So overall, I put this red dot fairly high up. When it comes to mental health, I'd say that out of all the things I could possibly talk about, mental health is one of the topics that I feel most comfortable communicating about. Through both professional and personal journeys, I've gained a fairly high level of mental health literacy. This was out of necessity, but I am acutely aware that if I were to compare myself with many of my peers, I'm very privileged to have the language to communicate about my experiences and advocate for them. So I'm going to put this blue dot very high up. The last intersectional lens is sexuality. I'm pansexual, which is a sexuality that sits underneath the umbrella of bisexual. It means that I can experience attraction to anyone regardless of their gender. If anyone here has watched Schitt's Creek, the TV series, there's a character that explains pansexuality when they're picking out wines and they say, "I like the wine, not the label." When it comes to physical health, I've been very lucky to have had access to queer-friendly healthcare providers. I find that most clinicians don't assume the gender of my partner, or we don't talk about the gender of my partner at all. However, this is not the case for all physical health services, particularly not queer-specific ones, and I definitely still experience some discrimination because of the people that I love. But overall, I put this red dot fairly high up. Sexuality has had major impacts on my mental health challenges. I've experienced many forms of discrimination and hate. These have catalysed many of my mental health challenges. However, there are a few queer mental health service supports, in Victoria particularly, and there's an increasing awareness of the need for queer-specific supports. So I'd say overall, I put this blue dot fairly low, but not too low. So these are my experiences of physical and mental health when looking through these 10 intersectional lenses. Given that at the symposium we're talking about being equally well and joining physical and mental health, I'm just going to quickly add another element to the screen. a purple dot that signifies the overall health, the combination of physical and mental health. I'm going to put the purple dots in between the blue and the red dots. So for example, on the ability line, the purple dot will go just in there, in the middle point between the red and blue dots on ability. And I'll just pop the rest of the purple dots on the screen now. Just when you think this is getting a little bit crowded, I'm just going to add one last element before I wrap up. But I promise this is the most important element. All of these lenses, all of these lines, they are not separate experiences. I do not experience being autistic as being separate to being a young person or separate to being a multicultural person. I experience all these intersections and a unique combination of them all the time. So instead of my experiences of health and equity looking a bit like these disconnected dots, they are intrinsically interconnected. If I wanted to show you what my experience of physical health and equity would look like, I wouldn't show you these disconnected red dots. I would join them up and it would look something like this. Similarly, if I wanted to show you what my experience of mental health and equity looks like, I wouldn't show you all these disconnected blue dots. I would join them up and it would look something like this. And finally, if I were to show you what my overall health and equity looked like, I would join up all the purple dots and it would look like something like this. These weird and wonderful shapes capture my experience of health and equity. They express my experience in ways that it's absolutely impossible to do whilst only looking through one lens. I experience all of these 10 intersectional factors and so many more factors all at once, all of the time. My lived and living experiences of health inequities are inherently intersectional. They cannot be separated and they can only be understood when seen through an intersectional lens. In conclusion, I really hope that you found this presentation interesting and that these lenses help you to also reflect on your intersectional experiences. I believe that we are each the experts of our own experiences, and it's only with our experiences combined that we can really address health inequities together. We can only be the experts of our own experience, and we need to learn from and with each other. So thank you again for listening, and I really look forward to working alongside you to help create a future that is equally and equitably well. Thank you.
Apologies to Emily. Sorry, I can't lip read. Do we have any questions from the audience? Do we have one? Feel a bit like a guest show host.
Emily, that was amazing. I'm a massive fan. I follow you on LinkedIn. This is a question that's quite directed and I guess unique to me, and I feel like you'd be able to maybe don't feel like you have to give a response. But I am also non-binary and obviously looking quite feminine. I find like it's really hard to, I suppose, self-advocate, and sometimes I feel like, you know, you wear the badges and like you put it in your email and you try and do all the things. But do you have any tips, I suppose, particularly in a workplace? Because I find at work is probably the hardest place, especially when like I'm in meetings with people who are maybe like quite high up, and I feel like I don't want them to think I'm like trying to be rude or anything. Which
No, thank you so much for that question, and it's really, really valid. Sorry, I totally forgot that there were questions. Sorry, in my head. I'm sorry. Which is why I went back up here. I find it's really hard, like, to identify as non-binary, but not like dress like super androgynously. Like, I like presenting as femme; it's nice. But I think like in workplaces, it's really hard, particularly if you don't want to be that person that is like inconvenient, or if you don't want to like make other people feel bad. Yeah. And I think like that's one of the worst things about correcting people about pronouns, is that if I'm correcting you, I'm trying to like build a relationship with you. Yes. And it's not that I'm like trying to make you feel bad. Exactly. Yeah. If I didn't care about what you thought about me, I wouldn't correct you on my pronouns. That's genuinely it. I think in workplaces, it's been hard to navigate, particularly for like people in power. And so I've had to like find allies that slowly introduce like their pronouns in settings, or like have like check-ins and people explain what pronouns are, and have someone else that's in a position of power to say that. That's been really, really good for me. And have like small, tiny conversations that explain like what non-binary is, why it's important to you, and because it's an inherent and important part of who you are. And for me, like I am so sick of watering myself down for other people and pretending to be something that I'm not for other people's convenience. So yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much.
I think we had one other question.
Hello.
Oh my God.
Hi. Hi, Emily. Thank you. That was a fabulous presentation. I work for Southwest Sydney Local Health District in the mental health service, and we're doing a lot of work in the genderqueer space. So for those of you who don't know, like I completely appreciate how hard it is to make inroads when you identify not from the cisgender, heteronormative, space. So I think we're one of the first LHDs to do the Gender Sphere project, which is a screening tool, and it's working really well in our adolescent units. We're rolling it out across the LHD, and a lot of our youth services have picked it up because it basically looks at seeing people who they are. It doesn't assume anything about anyone from the get-go. We've also, rolled out Welcome Here. We've signed up to Pride in Health, and we're just making these tiny little chippy inroads through our mental health service because in Southwest Sydney we see it as a real priority, given that in 2017 with the Marriage Equality Survey we scored 1, 2 and 3 for the no vote, Fairfield, Liverpool, Bankstown. So we see it as a big priority of ours, and particularly in terms of the intersectionality space. So thanks, it was a really, really great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Just one last question here. Firstly, thank you for that amazing talk. That's exactly what we needed at 9 a.m. actually. So you know how you said that when you are in a crisis, getting misgendered or the wrong pronouns can actually spiral. What are the self-care things you do to come out of it? Because if, say, I have a client in the future who is going through something like this, as someone who can never understand fully what that could mean, what would the self-care tips be that you would give?
It's like, thank you for that question. It's also really nice, like you're acknowledging that you don't know what it feels like because you don't identify as that, and that's like a really, really good step. I think for me, particularly when I'm in that crisis moment and I find it really hard to regulate, there's just the intrusive thoughts are a lot louder around like I'm being an inconvenient thing for other people, that sort of stuff. So I often reach out to set people who know what I'm like within those crises and know that how they can actually affirm me and what my like really like strength-based thoughts can be. And hearing from them, it's like it's so easier to contradict my own thoughts, but I can't say that my friend is wrong. If that makes sense. So like having those support people to just call on and be like, hey, like code word jelly bean, and they can just say like exactly what I need at that time. Like those sorts of support mechanisms I have set up in place. It's really nice to like not have to explain the whole situation again, particularly when you can't really regulate yourself.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have one more.
Hi, I'm Ruth, and I'm from regional Queensland and from a town called Wide Bay, the HHS. And what it was that I'm the consumer engagement facilitator, and I thought, how do we engage, the LGBTQI plus community when, that's not my cohort of people. And so I put a shout out and I got a consumer, a carer representative and staff, and we just, I just facilitate the group because it's led by that particular group, we've really made some inroads. And we started the You Are Here project, Your Welcome Here project, and we actually ended up on the Channel 7 local news. And I thought, for just, for such a small group, we've really made such an impact. And, and starting to get information about pronouns, and we started to wear badges and things like that. And so it's just sort of something that was so hidden and not spoken about. For just a regional HHS, we've been able to really open it up. So, so there is hope for wherever you are.
That's really, really beautiful. And like, I really love your approach to like recognizing that you don't have the expertise in a space because you don't have that lived and living experience, and that's okay. But there's always opportunities to provide platforms to other people. I think something that I really wanted to share was like, I am really underprivileged in a lot of senses, but I'm really privileged in a lot of other senses. And like, how can we leverage our privilege, amplify other people's voices, and provide those safe spaces that they can create for themselves? I don't expect anyone to just become multicultural, become autistic, and other things like that to understand who I am. But I do expect them to respect the differences between us and kind of like give power over when it's needed. That's really beautiful. Thank you.
Emily, thank you so much. I thought it was an excellent conversation starter you've created this morning. And what I can't help but notice here in this room is that despite the really broad spectrum of information you brought to us, the return response has been a lot of questions in relation to sexuality and gender. I guess I would make a note that would suggest to me that perhaps there's a bit more content we need in this space, so that there isn't only one person holding the conversation, and because it sounds like there's a lot of interest and care in the room for that space. And so just acknowledging, thanking you for holding that space and for holding those questions for everybody today. And I also just wanted to ask a bit more about whether or not where your experiences have been that have been really positive in relation to getting good cultural support that actually is meaningful and engages really well, and certainly in the health literacy space.
Thank you so much. And thanks for pointing that out as well. It is really interesting that a lot of the questions came from like the gender sexuality angle. And like, I think that is like an identified need, I think just generally. But when it comes to multicultural mental health, honestly, when it comes to literacy or understandings about culture and mental health, it's been such a paucity of spaces or identified spaces where we can really create safety for ourselves and really educate each other. I find that like that has been the biggest barrier, and I have had so many different startup activities in my head running around to do that sort of stuff. I'd say like the safest spaces for me have been just very small little startup groups that my peers have started out of necessity, out of frustration with lots of health services acknowledging that multicultural folks are important, but then often only going to like running a cultural responsiveness training rather than actually providing safe spaces for us to lead the way. I think that's something that I hope will really change. So those sorts of grassroots movements, I hope that they take off and that there's more spaces that are actually genuinely led by us. So we're really walking the walk, not just talking the talk. Thank you.
All right, probably our last question, just running for time. Thank you so much for sticking with it. It's been fantastic to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. Lisa Wilton from South Australia. My pronouns are she, her. We in South Australia have actually been doing a series of education sessions with our GPs and our mental health services together. And the last one, we did focus groups last year and asked what they wanted, and one of them was around gender identity. So we just recently ran one and we've videoed it, we've recorded it all, and it's actually available for people to actually have a look at. It received probably the most registrations that we have had. So we had over 110 registrations to attend. 74 people actually attended online, which was absolutely fabulous. And we had in-house registration as well. But that's actually available to anybody if they wanted to actually have a look at it. It was really great. We had a psychiatrist who works in the transgender area from an adolescent perspective, and we had a GP, and then we actually had 4 lived experience people present their information. So it's something that people are definitely crying out for. Yes, so that's there for anybody who wants to see, and I'll give you the link so that then people can have a look at that if you like.
Thank you so much for sharing that resource. I think like it really harks back to what you said as well, that like I can only speak about my experience. I'm not the elected spokesperson for any of these intersections or like marginalizations as well. I think everyone has their own unique experiences, and when you create these spaces where people can really speak for themselves and share their own experiences, that's when you really just learn a lot more. So if you are interested in learning about any of the intersections that we discussed today, whether that be gender, sexuality, disability, or anything else, really encourage you to just do a bit of a Google. Honestly, there are so many lived and living experience stories out there of people sharing their stories and vulnerability, and that can just be something to kind of start the conversation, open the door, and let other people through. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. We have to move on. Fantastic presentation. Thank you, Emily.